All right, welcome everybody to the Food for Earth Day 2020. It's the largest session ever broadcast on feeding the planet, organized by the Future Food Institute and the Food and Agricultural Organization E-Learning Academy of the United Nations for the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. During the virtual global mission, we'll cover a number of thematic areas such as sustainable development goals, climate smart agriculture, water and soils management, sustainable food system nutrition, food safety, food losses, rural poverty, you name it. Session number is actually 22. We're getting towards the end of the 24-hour marathon. My name is Tim West. I'm a global ambassador of the Future Food Institute based here in Bellingham, Washington. It is a pleasure of mine to be hosting the panel on a food chain for all. Really around values from grassroots to future trends. I'm joined here with three amazing colleagues and leaders in the future of food. Chef Mark Brand, who is up in Canada at the moment. We have Kevin Morse, who's here with me in the Skagit Valley in Washington State, and the one and only Mike Wolf, who is from the Spoon and the Smart Kitchen Summit, who I believe is in Seattle. So this is your West Coast entertainment and e-learning, and we're here really to talk about the food system, and the real reasoning behind it is to really highlight where the opportunities and challenges are in our food system as it sits right now. So what we're going to do is have each one of these gentlemen speak for about 10 or 15 minutes about the work that they're doing, trying to highlight the problems that they're solving and some of the major opportunities. And the real goal here is to share our own experiences and inspirations as we live in this wild world, as we're all trying to do our part for Earth Day and beyond, and build a better food system that is much more regenerative and nutrient dense and fair and accessible for all. So that's why we chose the topic. It is with great pleasure I get to introduce the one and only Mark Brand. He is an amazing chef that I had the pleasure of dozens of people trying to introduce me before we actually met. He has an incredible heart, a deep, vast experience in helping not just bring food and better food to the world, but getting people on their feet, feeling seen and heard and validated. His background is as a chef. He is the leader of the Better Life Foundation. He's going to tell you a little bit about that. It's an organization spanning Canada, the US, and Mexico. And he's an inspiration to all. And very excited to have you, Mark, and hear what you're up to and hear you share it. So thank you very much. Welcome.
Appreciate you, man. And I feel incredibly welcome, and also appreciative for Tim West always underplays himself. So let me just reflect back that Tim is also one of the greatest cooks on the planet, and more importantly, one of the greatest connectors. I'm not in this room if not because of him. My relationship with FFI and FAO is because of Tim West. And so appreciate you, man, and for always putting us in positions to be seen. As he mentioned, our work, and where I am in Vancouver, BC right now, we created a blended model business. We were one of the first B corporations in the world, where we thought that Benefit Corp, as they're more commonly known, was the only way to go forward in business, and that business and charitable endeavors didn't have to be separate, that they could be the same thing, that they should be the same thing, that they were the same thing, actually. And so we created a social impact incubator. And I say those words specifically because it was a let's throw everything at the wall in F&B, in food and beverage, and see what works to benefit the planet. And we've come up with everything from alternate currencies to archetypes for how to employ those who are diversely abled. We don't say the words disabled because people with diverse abilities are incredibly important and equally and often more times valuable to our organization and others. So I love the work that we do. And I think a lot comes from being an activist. And so that is what came to my mind this morning when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about and what would be best of use. Is I think after a full day of learning, or 21 hours for those of you marathoning, what does it actually mean to be an activist? And what is the role of an activist? And to think about what it means to bring somebody here, to bring them cerebral and help them understand what marginalized communities look like, what poverty looks like, what hunger looks like globally, locally, what all those things are. That matters. It matters to help people understand those things. And I spend 250 plus days a year doing that. But what matters way more, and I would trade readily for this, is to get them activated to actually doing something. So we're in this moment where a lot of us have taken cerebral information in and said, okay, yeah, we get it. And we will armchair, and people will Instagram, and they will talk about it, and they will show up on forums. But when it comes to time to show up to polls or to show up at the farmer's market versus the grocery store, they don't show up. And it really has put us in this position. So to think about what our critical role is as activists, it's to get people to actually move. And I was thinking about the great activists and those who have been able to move millions from the MLKs through. What was it that they did? And what it was spoke plainly. They spoke plainly and truthfully, and the authenticity always reigned through the greatest leaders. And so when we're thinking about our messaging as organizations, as food purveyors, as chefs, as whatever it is that we do, what is the simplest way we can convey our message to help people understand how to activate? How not to be informed, but to activate. All right, so those things are important to me. As a systems designer as well, this is a moment that is unprecedented for opportunity. And I know that we've heard that unprecedented word, but we don't want to hear it anymore, all right? But it really is. The opportunity here to evaluate the system is so interesting to me. So when we think about our food systems, we know the planet's broken. We know for sure that we're on a collision course. The planet will be eventually fine, but life will end. And that we have a really, really important choice to make right now. Food production, and we're going to hear a bunch of that from Kevin, and I'm so excited that Kevin Morris is here. We're going to hear about what that growing cycle and responsible growing cycles looks like. Right now, the grossly irresponsible production of food, most of us are chained to it. And most of us are unaware that we're chained to it. And it started at a time of necessity, but really the place that it is now is completely unsustainable. And that equates down to food sales. Now we saw instantly most restaurants on the planet evaporate. Well, what are restaurants? At their very core, they're places of convening. Our fondest memories happen in them or around them. I've hosted hundreds of weddings. I've attended thousands of life-changing moments in our spaces or working in other people's. When those places are gone because they're no longer sustainable because of the way these systems work, what does that mean for us as a society is a big question. And of course, employment. What does employment now look like? If we all start our job, like everybody worked as a busboy, as a bartender at some point in college, all of these things, and we start to understand the relation to being social beings more and being in service, that is a critical system. And a lot of people find their purpose in it. So if all of those things as a system are being exposed, then we value the things that we know we didn't value prior. So we're seeing moments of people buying direct from supplier, and they're so amazed at the level of quality, how close it is that it exists in their own backyard, and how inexpensive it is in comparison. We've always thought that direct from farmer meant expensive. It was a premium. CSA boxes that will feed you for a week are $25. And people are starting to wrap their head around it. That is a critical moment. That's not just a nice to have, that's a change in the system and incredibly important. So we're taking this moment to also continue training. One of the things that we do as a Better Life Foundation, and I'll finish with this, is we train people. We feed, train, and employ. So we start with our meal program that happens just 2 blocks away from here that is currently at 1,800 meals a day. That goes to 17 single room occupancy hotels, which is transitional housing for people transitioning out of poverty or incarceration, or whatever else. We do that work to inform and train people who have those diverse abilities and then help them find gainful employment elsewhere. Great. How do you take that to people who are living entrenched? So we've done trainings everywhere from Brownsville, New York City, which has got the poorest zip code, also has the highest rate of diabetes, has the highest rate of heart disease, and work with women and children there to help them understand the power in food and provide food justice. If you understand how to make it, which we stopped understanding, there's crazy power in that. Power in your own confidence, but power in your body health. So we're starting next week in those trainings remotely by sending those same $25 CSA boxes from farmer friends of ours everywhere from San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York, direct to doorsteps. And just like this, we're going to teach people how to cook, because this crisis shouldn't tear us further apart. It should be an opportunity for us to expose the systems and work together. So yeah, thank you for having me. That's a little bit of what I do, and looking forward to hearing from everybody else.
Mark, you're an absolute gem, a walking heart. Your words remind me of that Margaret Mead quote, never doubt that a small group of well-intentioned people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. If I may, I want to ask you just kind of a few more questions. And I think one of the things that people might be asking and thinking right now is, how to get involved. What are some things that I can do? I feel like, personally, I feel somewhat hopeless at times, and I'm hoping maybe you have some ideas or insights on what people can do to feel like they're contributing in these wild and unprecedented times.
Absolutely. And I've got a quick analogy for you. I think that'll be helpful, which is it's a game of inches. There's so many of us, right? I believe that if everybody did a little bit, there wouldn't be enough good to go around. We'd be fighting over it. It's like, I want to volunteer. No, there's no room for another month. And with the popular places, that's actually a real thing, right? Where we now know, because of our situation, you can't adopt a dog in North America. There's none left. The shelters are empty, right? In these critical moments, we look at different things. So what is your part? What is the part that you can play? And in a Venn diagram of the part that you could play, the top of that diagram is, what do I really care about? You have to ask yourself what you genuinely and truthfully, what is your truth about what you care about? I don't need you to care about homelessness or poverty. Like that's my bag. You could care about anything you want, but just be truthful to that. How much bandwidth do I have? How much time do I have genuinely that I can commit to that same thing that I care about? What is the amount of time? It can be an hour a month. What is that? And then what is a skill set that I can bring to the organization that sits in between those two things that they actually need, that I can research myself and find out without burdening them? Not calling them incessantly until they answer and be like, hey, how could I help? All of the nonprofit world, aside from like literally 0.01%, are vastly under-resourced and understaffed. But if somebody came to me and said, hey, Mark, you know what? I can see from your menu that you guys do cause lettuce. I've got a wonderful cause lettuce supplier from Skagit who would love to donate enough to make sure that this works on your menu, and I can facilitate that and I could get it to you once a week. Check mark. People get fed, right? So finding that little niche that you're wonderful at, because I know one thing for certain, Tim, if you do something that you're not great at and you overcommit, you never go back and you feel terrible about it. So
wise words, man. Thank you very much. One thing that I can commit to, and one thing that I really love, enjoy, is getting words like that out, showcasing leaders like yourself. You're doing great work in the world. Thanks for making the time, sharing your experience and insights. So we're going to move on to the next speaker, but at the end, if we have more time, we're going to loop back into questions from the internet. On to the one and only Kevin Morse, who appears to be sitting in a field of beautiful greens right now. Kevin and I got connected through Mike Lee of Food Tech Connect World in New York. I heard that Kevin was doing incredible work on the supply chain side of the wheat industry and the grain industry up here in the breadbasket of the United States, the Skagit Valley. And he is working with farmers and making them more money and making the whole entire basis of our food system much more sustainable. So Kevin, I'm really excited to have you here as a part of the Future Food extended community and family, to hear talk to the international audience. Tell us what you're doing, tell us what you're excited about, and please speak to the transitioning food system as you see it.
Great. Thank you, Tim. It's an honor to be here. I appreciate being part of this panel. Mark, some of the things you said really resonated with me. I wish we had another hour and a half. I do want to riff on a couple things you said. One is how we're living in an unprecedented time that's exposing how our systems are actually broken. It's really unfortunate that it took a pandemic for a greater population of people to see and understand, one, how vulnerable we are when supply chains break down and we can't get things that we need daily for our own nourishment, whether it's food or healthcare, protection equipment for nurses. And I was talking to a friend of mine who is an economist and a systems analyst, and she described this as a macro shock. And it really does open up an opportunity to create a new conversation that's heard better by the population, because they're actually suffering in many ways because of what's going on. And it gives us an opportunity to hopefully create greater change on a broader scale. And if you ever need flour, brother, I'll put it on a truck to you. You just tell me when, okay? I guess what I'd like to do is share a little bit of my journey that touches on these issues, Tim, and we can make this interactive. Because I'm 55. I've spent about 35 years as a farmer, as an entrepreneur, as a conservationist, and as an economic development executive. And I've spent my entire life, I was telling Sarah earlier, trying to recreate my Italian upbringing and bring back local food systems and build community around food and connect people from all around the world with it. And as I worked on these issues, conservation, soil stewardship, clean, healthy food, community prosperity, community health, I guess you could call me a slow learner, but what I discovered on this journey after 35 years is that the driver behind some of these issues, whether you're in a for-profit or nonprofit trying to fix, was being driven by the industrial food system. It was being driven by highly processed, highly centralized, highly processed food companies that pushed that production down to the farmer, which creates unsustainable farming practices, which impacts the environment, which impacts farmer viability, soil health, water quality, air quality. And I was like, wow, the best thing I could do with my next 50 years is to help build more regenerative local food systems. And as I started learning more about the opportunity in grains, wheat is one of the world's 4 largest commodities. So the opportunity to system change and have impact globally really struck a chord. And then I learned about the history of milling and flour in this world. And this is something I need to share because it really opened my eyes and is a great example of what's wrong with our food system and what we can do to fix it. So in the United States, we had 24,000 mills just 100 years ago. And the system was diverse, it was decentralized, it was resilient. We have more than 100,000 varieties of wheat in this world. And so the farmers picked the grains that had disease resistance. We didn't have chemical interventions. They had crop rotations. They picked wheat that milled well. And then the bakers and the millers actually chose wheat for things like flavor, milling quality, baking quality. And then what happened when you had all those mills and they're a hub of commerce, all that value stayed in the community. And so it was a very resilient, a very prosperous system. You fast forward 100 years, Tim, guess how many mills we have in this country now?
I'm going to guess 5,000.
We've gone from 24,000 to 166.
Wow.
Highly centralized, owned by 5 companies. When all of those small mills closed, all that value got extracted from those communities, all those jobs, all the regenerative farming practices went away, and they got put in one place. It put us into a monocrop system that's unsustainable, and it really drove a lot of those environmental impacts that I talked about earlier. The whole model is based on the cheapest grain possible, and from grain that's mixed and bought from all over the world. So what most people don't know is the grain that's in that flour that's on the bag in the grocery store could be from Kansas, could be Canada, could be South Dakota, it could be Kazakhstan or China. There's no traceability. And the sourcing is basically, the criteria are protein and yield, not flavor, not nutrition, not traceability. And it's put the farmer into a race to the bottom that's unsustainable. The other result is we have more farmer suicides and more farmer bankruptcies in this country. They're record numbers right now because they are stuck in that commodity system. So that's the bad news, I guess. Tim, you asked, like, what's the good news? So Cairn Spring Mills, we started this 5 years ago. We're a social purpose corporation. We're a for-profit company with goals of feeding our community clean food, taking good care of the earth, and keeping farmers viable. And so we're going back to the future a little bit. We're rediscovering grain varieties that grow well here, that have flavor. We source direct from the farmer. We pay them a premium so they stay viable, and then we minimally process our grains to make a more healthy, flavorful flour. And it's been remarkable to see the market acceptance. We've grown 30% a quarter, 8 quarters in a row. And what's been incredibly remarkable and gratifying as this pandemic has hit is to see, like, wow, how resilient this can make our community. So people are out of flour everywhere. But we're able to still make our supply chains local. It's not interrupted. It's not disrupted. I'm keeping 8 people working. I'm able to provide bakeries, restaurants, stores with flour. In other regions, people can't get it. The farmers are still sending us grain. We're still writing contracts. We're able to donate food to the local food banks for feeding the local population. We're providing flour for the local tribal communities whose elders are sequestered away and in lockdown right now because of COVID. And so, Mark, to your point earlier, all of a sudden people are like, wow, we really need these local food systems. Look at the difference here in the Skagit Valley versus somewhere else in the country where we don't have this local farming economy. We have people driving from 3-4 hours away here on Fridays to pick up flour directly from the mill. So again, it's really been an eye-opener. It's been a community builder. And what we hope to do in this time is inspire other communities here and around the world that rebuilding these supply chains, rebuilding these local food systems isn't just important in bad times, it's important all the time. And I really think that they should be considered critical and essential infrastructure, just like roads, just like sewers when we used to be in economic development. This is critical infrastructure and we need to make it sustainable and we need to invest in it. So I'll stop there, Tim, if you want to have any back and forth or ask any questions.
Yeah, right on. I would say the proof is in the pudding, but the proof is in the bread in this case. I was down at your mill last Friday and cars are lining up around the block. People are picking up bags of your flour and bacon at home and sharing food. So you're doing incredibly critical work, especially in this wild time. I do have a few questions I'd love you to speak to if you can. Sure. One question would be, what can farmers do and what can farmers do different? I'm specifically speaking to kind of grain or wheat farmers. And then the second question would be what can consumers do different?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. One of the reasons I got into a for-profit business to create change was to create new markets that paid farmers a premium that would actually sustain them. So I say for farmers, it's tough because they can only operate under what the economic system can support. For them, I would just say, come together with other farmers, come together with the other entrepreneurs in your community, find a way, whether it's through value-added processing of grains or vegetables, find ways to bring back local processing, because what the limiting factor is backwards facing. It's rebuilding the local supply chains, rebuilding the local infrastructure that can add value so that they can raise premium crops and get rewarded for things like regenerative practices. So I would say search, as Fred Rogers would say, look for the helpers, and find a group of people in your community who want to rally around doing business a new way that will be a race to the top instead of a race to the bottom.
That surely sounds like the world I want to live in. Before I let you go and we move on to Mike Wolf, could you speak a little bit to the logo on your hat? What is a Cairn Spring and a mill?
Well, Cairn Spring, we made up the word Cairn Spring. Cairns are like rock monuments that help people find their way um, in desolate landscapes. And so, and it's rock, it's elemental, it's from the earth. And so, and the spring is fresh and clean. So we had to make up a word, and that really resonated with us. And so we think of it as a symbol for people to find their way back to sustainable agriculture and local flour.
Well, we at Future Food sure did find you, and we will lead others your way. Thank you very much for sharing your story and your insights, and we'll loop back around right after we give the one and only Mike Wolf a chance to share a little bit about what he's up to. Thanks very much.
Roger that. Thanks, Tim.
All right, Mike Wolf, I've been following your work for a while. With The Spoon, you actually do some very similar work of helping people really better understand the trends and what's happening in our food system. I recently had the pleasure of going to your food personalization summit in New York. I know that you run the Smart Kitchen Summit focused on kind of gadgets and hardware and so forth, but you do have this bird's eye view of the food system. I know you look a lot on the macro trends level. So would love to hear a little bit about the way that you see the world kind of pre-COVID and post-COVID, and where you think it's going and what you think people can do to contribute and be the best versions of themselves in this near future.
Great. Well, thanks. I appreciate the time, and I'm in awe of the 24-hour marathon presentation that you guys, Sarah, and the whole crew's putting on. Kevin, I just want to be able to get in line for some flour, if that's possible. Got the thumbs up. I spend most of my time nowadays, as you indicated, covering and analyzing the world of innovation around food and food systems. My background is as a journalist and as an analyst for most of the past 15 or 20 years. And I want to put the analyst hat on and spend a little bit of time looking at what we're seeing in terms of the impact of COVID, and then what I think will be happening longer term, as I think the technology and innovation side of things, the industries need to focus in on creating and solving real problems rather than looking at solving more superficial problems, which I think has been a problem for the food tech, or particularly for the technology world. So I'm actually going to try and do a presentation here. Let's see if I can share my screen. We'll see how this goes. Let's see. All right. And can you see the presentation side?
Yeah, we got you. Nice work.
Great, great. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about COVID-19 and the pivot that we're seeing across the food system, and hopefully what I think will be a recalibration towards a more sustainable innovation era. I mean, we've all seen the change that's been forced upon us, right? We've seen people baking bread. We see people going and getting food delivered. My parents, who were in their late 70s, for the first time ever, had groceries delivered to them. This is a snapshot from Italy. If you look from McKinsey & Company, where basically data shows that 33% of consumers for the first time ever in the past 2 months have done online grocery delivery. 42%, about half of the people who use video conferencing for professional use have started doing that in the last couple of months. So we've seen jarring, jolting behavior change forced upon us across our daily lives. And consumers are stacking up and preparing for home food preparation. 44% month over month increase from April to March increases in online food purchases. It's amazing it's an amazing jarring increase. We've all become bakers. I, for the first time, basically started trying to bake bread over the past month or so. 3,000% increase in searches for active dry yeast on Amazon.com. 3,600% increase for searches for flour. Many of us are becoming chicken farmers or want to become chicken farmers. Interest in raising chickens is at an all-time high, believe it or not. Not surprising when I think that we've all, for the first time, many of us have actually started to wonder if we have access to food. Maybe we want to raise chickens and raise eggs. But it's not all good news. If you look at online food sales in comparison to restaurant reservations, they're actually mirror opposites. So people started buying food and bringing it into their homes. At the same time, we've seen everyone stop going to restaurants, largely forced upon us, not surprisingly. We've probably heard this over the course of the past 24 hours, and we've certainly been hearing about it in the news. So basically what I've seen and what we've seen is basically a forced pivot up and down the food system. Restaurants have had to go digital. They've focused entirely on delivery and takeout. Food distributors and farmers have had, for the first time ever, in many cases, to go direct to consumer. Grocery has had to go entirely online, pickup and delivery, basically taxing their systems and really putting their workers on the front lines. Food service companies have, for the first time, had to focus in many cases on first responders. Governments, as their enterprise and cafeteria customers, have had to close. But pivoting oftentimes means building new things. This is actually a picture of basically a send to home box, a subscription box that literally a month ago didn't exist. People saw that an innovator, an entrepreneur saw that there was a demand for baking bread, saw people couldn't get access to yeast, to flour, and within basically 2 weeks, they created a subscription box. You could buy this and get it delivered to your home. So the good news is that building has never been easier with the democratization of tech. This is a snapshot from a site called Tindy, where you can buy maker gadgets or maker ingredients and build anything, whether it's an Arduino or a 3D printer and supplies. It's easier than ever to get access to cloud infrastructure, to get access to website infrastructure and service. We've really, over the past 2 decades, seen a complete democratization of tech, and that's spread into the food system. But I have to wonder, and I've been thinking a lot about over the past month or two, what have we done with all this democratized innovation? If you look at the biggest IPOs over the past year, or the past couple of years, it's been companies like Airbnb, Zoom, we're talking on Zoom today, Slack, Uber, really lots of market value creation all around enterprise software, two-sided marketplaces, social media. What I think today, if you look at when we're talking about survival, almost seems not inconsequential, but you wonder if we've been focusing on the right things. I think that we're going to see this change. I think technology's big pivot will be from superficial to survival in the near term. And finally, I think what I predict is in the long term, we'll see a big pivot towards more sustainable innovation. Short-term survival, right? Like here's a 3D printed face mask. We've seen the stories, we've heard that this isn't necessarily food, but we're seeing makers step up to the plate and actually make things to help us get through this pandemic. We're seeing businesses pivot. This is FanWide is basically a sports site, help bars basically bring live sports into the venues, but now they're pivoting to chefs who basically want to show cooking classes. I know Mark Brand's been working with some of his friends to help them bring online cooking classes to their followers. There's now platforms literally that have pivoted in the past 2 weeks to help make this happen. And finally, I think longer term, we're seeing a pivot towards survival that we're going to need to sustain us as a species. Here's an article from Wired that talks about modernizing meat production to help us avoid pandemic. So I think basically what we're seeing is ultimately over time a recalibration and a focus on more sustainable innovation. There's been a lot of conversation in the venture capital community, people like Mark Andreessen asking why we don't build things anymore. I think part of the reason is the reward structures have been completely wrong. We've been rewarding people for short-term innovation around market value creation and not rewarding them towards building real things that help us as a society in a big way and help the world last longer. So some final thoughts. I think COVID-19 has forced changes that will radically reshape the food industry. I think industry digitization and tech adoption will largely be permanent and never go back to the way it was in the food system in a lot of part of our lives. I think some shifts will have some residual impact, but we'll see some slipping back to the old ways. I think some consumers might actually get tired of cooking. Longer term, I think the innovation ecosystem will place more emphasis on significant and sustainable change. But I think there's some risks we need to address. I think there's structural risks that needs to be addressed, particularly around reward structures that need to change to reward more sustainable innovation. I think that we have too much capital concentration. We've heard about, for example, the shift towards like 150 mills. That's all about capital concentration towards large conglomerates, and we've seen too much of that. And finally, I think we're in an era of misinformation and destabilized political and economic systems, which I think could hinder this move towards more sustainable innovation. So that's really kind of my high level presentation and trying to kind of put a bow on it. And I'll hand it back to you, Tim.
Yeah, you have so much in there, Mike. Really appreciate the high level. We could do an entire session just on that alone. I guess one of the questions that I have, and the way that I've seen the kind of progression of this conversation today is, Mark is really talking about that kind of grassroots level, what you can do in your community. Kevin is speaking from the kind of the supply chain, farmer side, producers, and shifting that. And you're talking about the kind of more business side, higher level. Can you maybe think of any examples of really bigger corporations that are doing the right thing in these times? Or the question is really coming from, for anybody who's listening that is in the corporate side of things, what are some models that could be replicated? How do we make it so it's not just a big revenge of the big companies and the titans wiping out all of these small entrepreneurs? How can we really collaborate and make this bad situation better? Does that question make sense?
I think so. I mean, I think if I were to look at some of the big unicorn type companies in the food system in particular, you've seen, for example, Ginkgo Bioworks take a lot of the work they've done around synthetic creations around food and around biocrops, and basically allow that to be used as a platform for some innovation around helping solve for COVID and helping to innovate around getting some sort of solution around that. I think the challenge is what we don't want to see is big companies that are large publicly held companies try to capitalize on this from a cynical standpoint and just use it to make money. And I think we've seen a lot of big companies actually open up their systems and reallocate some of their capital towards helping people. So I think Amazon saying that they're going to delay non-essentials and actually put the capital and the resources towards getting food to people quicker. I think that's been great. So I think there's been some big companies that have been redeploying capital and optimizing their system to help people in need in the short term.
Right on. And this is kind of a interesting question, but I was just thinking, if you were in charge of distributing funds to businesses in need, who and where would you be deploying capital? Who do you think needs the most help right now, and who is most critical to help us transition to that food system that we need?
I think I would give it to, I'd invest in education and in STEM around an application around biosciences for a longer term help. But in the short term, in terms of like, if we're talking about government funds, I would absolutely get it to small businesses who are on the front lines and trying to get their employees and keeping them on the payroll. I mean, I don't know if that's answering around innovation. I think that's what needs to happen in the short term.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, I mean, farmers as well, of course. We have about 15 minutes left with the rest of our session. I don't think we've had any major questions come in from the internet, but I wanted to at very least open it up if we have questions amongst us for each other in each other's work. And then finally, before we wrap up in about 5 or 10 minutes or so, in these type of situations, I always like to make sure that we have the opportunity to make time for asks and offers. And what I mean by that is, I have a need for, I'm making an example, helpers to come help and load trucks and cars for flour. And the offer is, I can give a discount to anybody who is already working in the industry for flour. So I wanted to at very least make sure that each of the work that you're doing is highlighted and that you have an opportunity for asks and offers. But first, if we have any kind of burning questions, I know that there's been a lot of inspiring thoughts shared, but I'll just open it up amongst us right now.
I just love to hear the stories like Mark and Kevin. I mean, we are trying to cover people who are working and trying to innovate in real time around near-term survival and long-term survival, but also just using their platforms like Mark towards helping people in need and being very generous with those platforms. We want to continue to hear those stories so we can cover them on the spoon. So any any sort of innovation you hear about folks like Mark or like Kevin out there, and if you guys know of anyone in your ecosystem that you think is worth writing about, I would just ask that you let us know over at the Spoon.
Absolutely. And what's your contact info for anybody who's listening and for anybody here?
Yeah, best way is just to reach out on Twitter. I know Mark's an Instagram guy. I'm more of a Twitter guy. So at Michael Wolf, that's how you spell my name. And just my direct messages are open and I respond pretty quickly. So.
Okay, awesome. Kevin, Mark, do you guys have any thoughts or questions or asks or offers to share?
You know, I just have a couple stories maybe to reinforce what Michael just said as well. And what your graphs and data showed. We had our business drop 50% within a week after all the shelter in place. And so we got hit hard, and we've been a wholesale business selling flour in 50-pound bags and 1-ton super sacks for 3 years. And we just thought, well, why don't we just sell those direct to the public? And now we have cars, 100 cars lining up around the block because we've just gone online. We've created a store on Square, and people can pre-order, drive up. They don't even have to get out of their car. We put it in their trunk and they drive away. But the need to pivot and the opportunity here has been unbelievable to us. Costco is now wanting us in their stores. The grocery stores want us in. And one of the offers, one of the things we're trying to do with our restaurant and bakery customers who've been hit so hard is now we're thinking about Karen Spring flour outposts, where I'm just going to send them a pallet of flour and they can use it for their bread. They can sell it, and when they can pay us back, they'll pay us back. But the community building around this, I don't know if you can capture that in the data, but that's what's the physical infrastructure and the ability to make flour and our supply chain has made us more resilient. But what's been amazing is the community of people that's been built around this mill that I think is a big part of the resilient story as well. So, and it's something that Mark is speaking to as well. It's like there is so much power in community, and we have a crisis in community. And this pandemic has just really opened up an opportunity to bring more people in. So I would love to work with all of you on ways to continue that.
Yeah, well, I could probably just offer a build, Tim, if it's helpful.
Please.
From what I'm seeing around that same community base, which is when this all popped off, we were only doing about 900 to 1,000 meals a day at that time. And the need immediately doubled, but also the quantity need doubled. So if you can imagine, if you're living in poverty, you have a few options, especially in our densely marginalized neighborhood of the downtown east side. If you're from America, you can imagine it being like Skid Row or the Mission and Tenderloin, but denser and harder. It's 5 blocks and insane. And it's really, really challenging. So all of the people that would come and bring food, randomly on those one days, they just disappeared. So you've got people being impacted that we don't think about. And so the opportunity to look at the system, of course, arose. And for us, we were seeing everybody on the planet, literally Instagram being my thing. My feed was just jammed with everybody running to ER rooms with Subway subs. And I was like, God, please stop this. But at the same time, it was like, they want to provide food to doctors and nurses. They're like, I want to support the system that's supporting us. And that's super, super important. And so I was like, that's an important part of this. Who else shows up? And so I dove into the paramedics. Like, I hear sirens every 30 minutes outside my window. I normally hear them every few hours, every day, but it was every 20 or 30 minutes. And so I got in touch with the paramedics and said, who's feeding you guys? And they said, nobody's even called us. I'm like, wow, you're speaking of essential, like you are the duty of care from home to hospital. Without you, there is no conduit to being saved. And the words were appreciated, but we started a meal program for them pretty much immediately. So we had first responders coming in ambulances to pick those up, which gave my team an incredible boost. And the interesting part is not that we were able to do that, is that when we shared it out, everybody was like, oh, what a blind spot. Like, I want to help paramedics. So the paramedics reached out to me on Sunday and they said, hey, we're really loving the food and we're not sure how to communicate this, but we have too much. I'm like, I'm sorry. And they're like, we have too much food. People dropping food off all the time. So we don't need yours. And can you give it to somebody else? And so within about 9 days, we'd started a program and completed the program, because we don't need to continue to service that need, because we activated people, as I talked about in my talk, to do the work. That's what real activism is, by showing people like, oh, I can do that. I love paramedic. Actually, my cousin's a paramedic. I didn't even think about talking to my cousin. How's my cousin doing? And so mental health increases, our awareness of the community that services us increases, and we get our food back to give to people who need it more, like Indigenous centers and sex workers who are doing it real hard right now too. So yeah, communities everywhere.
I just
Right.
want to,
Oh,
Go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. I just want to riff off what Kevin talked about and just his amazing shift and pivot towards going direct to consumer, and how we've seen companies like yours do that. One of the things I think that we as a society did is we let our infrastructure and our resiliency atrophy a little bit. And I think one of the things that I think a shock like this does is helps us kind of tone up the system a little bit and recalibrate and let us become more resilient. And I think that's really important. I mean, I think I think consumers, for the first time ever, many of them are thinking about basically food sovereignty. Like it's a conversation that countries like Japan have all the time. If you're an island state, but if you're like a household, you don't think about this. And so I think I love the fact that you've gone direct to consumer. I love the fact that Costco is calling you and you were able to go on Square. So this democratization of technology and the easy access to it, I think is fascinating. And I think it's great. I just want to give a shout out to Sherry Huss, who's been in the YouTube comment section and it was instrumental in Maker Faire. And she just talked about how she's really excited about seeing all the makers step up. And I think that's one thing we've seen is makers are having a moment right now. All these things they've been working on for the past 15, 20 years, they're putting to good use. So thank you, Sherry, for all the work you've done.
I had a follow-up question for Mark, actually. We had a meeting with the Food Security Task Force yesterday. And where we've been really hit hard is that so many of the volunteers for the food banks who do the repackaging and distribution are elderly. And they have to stay locked down right now. Where are you finding the help right now?
Yeah, so I one of my roles, one of my hats is I sit on the New York City Food Bank Food Policy Council. So I help work with them, and we do, as a Better Life Foundation, help facilitate the Harlem Food Bank and work out there. And they have a super robust system that actually engages the youth and students as well, so that they find their volunteer base is very robust. So they diversify, much like you're talking about. They're looking at different ways that in case something was to happen, they have more than enough, right? So I believe it's a comms issue. I think it's a communication issue. And I think it's a building that more robust system. So even saying that, right? It's like all of our volunteers are elderly. Is that a good idea? Because if food insecurity needs to be taught to the youth, they need to understand that people are donating half bags of gummy bears and that's not okay. And also that the only thing they have today is pinto beans and there needs to be more fresh produce. Like that education needs to be with the youth as well. So that system is complex. I think the food bank right now has a tremendous opportunity, focal point, right? To say, this is the system that we need to have going forward and we need your help. People are chomping at the bit to show up. I turn away hundreds of messages a week that are just like, can we come cook? Like there is no space. So I'm certain the food banks are getting that same sort of influx, and happy to talk with you about it offline and provide any guidance I can.
That would be great, because it's a good lesson learned that we can pass on here that would be put to use.
Absolutely.
One of the things that's interesting, because this is like the two worlds combined, we're talking about market forces and innovation and makers and volunteers and nonprofits, is there's a tremendous opportunity for public-private partnerships here. So when we were talking about the need for more sustainable products that can be shelf stable year round, we need a dehydrator, we need a quick freeze facility, we need another flour mill possibly. And so why can't we combine forces that both serve a market need and a community need and bring entrepreneurs together who can help grow those businesses with the support from that diverse community? It's a powerful approach. What we found here in the Skagit is this has really been like an old-fashioned barn raising. It wasn't my idea. This was an idea of the Port of Skagit, the Washington State University Bread Lab, the impact investors, the farmers, the community all came together to build this mill together and lift it up. And it wasn't one big mega corporation coming in with a lot of money and just trying to keep the farmers in the commodity system. And the power of that community and that sense of ownership, really, we've had zero marketing dollars, Michael, for 3 years, and we've grown 30% a quarter. It's been all through word of mouth and community, and hopefully making a good product. But I think there's incredible opportunity to tie these things together so that we can build that infrastructure and build those networks so that we're more resilient and maybe a little more on balance. You know, technology and development have been big priorities, like you said, over the past couple decades. And as much as I see the value in technology, right now you can't eat a smartphone app. Okay, so we need to bring back balance. And if we can invest in these systems, and as we come out of COVID, have a more balanced approach to how we invest our time and our money and our energy, I hope that that's one of the changes that come out of this.
Right on.
Great.
Well, we have just a couple of minutes left. Unless y'all have any burning questions or last statements, I had kind of one last provocative question for us. I think sometimes because we work so deep in this industry, it's easy to overlook the things we take for granted, the knowledge we have. And this session is being recorded. It's going to be shared on YouTube and live in YouTubes. So the question is, what are some of the brands or companies or products or news sources that we use that maybe people who are listening might want to be a part of? So for instance, I look at the Food Tech Connect newsletter, and that's a great use of information always coming through. And I support the work of World Central Kitchen. I think those guys are doing some really good work. If we just want to kind of go around quick, if anybody has any resources to share for anybody who would be listening of stuff that we follow and we support and we would like to promote. And Francesco says we have 1 minute left. So any brilliant ideas?
I'm good.
We know you're good. Support Mark Brand and A Better Life Foundation.
I mean, I think I've been inspired locally here, because we're all kind of in the Northwest by what Eric Rivera has been doing here as a chef, and just like being a source of inspiration for other chefs and other restaurant operators. And instead of just kind of folding up the tent, just seeing this as an opportunity and maybe even increasing his business. Now, he's a force of nature, but I'd definitely recommend checking out his Twitter feed and following him. So.
Awesome. Yeah. Looking forward to it. Thank you for that last one, gentlemen, for all of your time. We are currently out, but look forward to see the rest of the sessions and continuing the conversation in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Session. Here, guys.
Okay. All right. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thanks to our guests, Mark Brand, Michael Wolf, and Kevin Morse for this amazing session. So we will continue our Food for Earth Day marathon, that is the world's largest lesson on feeding the future. And the next session will be in California and will be hosted by Chiara Cecchini, that is CEO and co-founder of Future Food America. The session will be live in a few minutes and will be live like the other ones from youtube.com/Future Food Institute. So see you next, and thank you.